In July 1995, my wife, 4 children, and I arrived at our church parking lot in inner city Fort Worth to the sound of multiple gunshots, which appeared to be coming from the edge of the parking lot. We hurried our kids inside the church as police, ambulance, and fire units began responding. Throughout the day, we heard church members talking about the event and how frightened they were as the event was taking place. Since it was a busy day for me, I didn't think much more about what had taken place that morning. On the news that evening, I saw a picture of the shooter and heard details about the event. At an apartment complex just across the street from the church, the shooter had killed 3 children, had wounded their mother, 2 Good Samaritans, and also the first police officer on the scene. It crossed my mind that the shooter looked familiar. The next morning, I called the church to offer my help. They told me that the shooter was a maintenance security employee of the church. He lived in the apartment complex behind the church where the shooting took place. He was also active in a citizens patrol group in the local neighborhood. The man had been a babysitter for the children he killed. When one of the children told their mom that the man was molesting them, the mom said that she was going to notify the police. The man then loaded his rifle, came to her apartment to attempt to kill her and the children. The church also told me that the older 2 children had been to Sunday school, to vacation Bible school, and the week before the shooting, they had attended the church's day camp for children of working parents. I asked the church if there was anything I could do to help. They said that the church counselor had retired the week before the shooting and was on vacation. The minister told me that any help I could provide was appreciated. This led to 2 to 3 weeks of intensive counseling with staff members who worked with the shooter, with children's workers who had the 2 older children in their classes, and other church members who were impacted by the shooting, including parents whose children were traumatized by the event. We also worked with the community groups like the Citizens Patrol Group, of which the shooter was a member, and we offered free counseling services to those living in the apartment complex where the shooter lived and where the shooting had taken place. Being involved in this event led me to evaluate the field of crisis and trauma counseling, especially from the perspective of how can churches, ministers, and Christian counselors best help those who have been impacted by crisis events that have taken place for them. Similarly, I wanted to know how churches could respond to larger scale disaster events that take place in the church and in the surrounding community. These are the types of issues that we will ponder in the upcoming sessions. Why is it important for Christians, for counselors, and for those in ministry to be prepared to deal with crises of this nature? Let me suggest a few reasons why preparation for crisis ministry is important and even crucial. Doing so demonstrates care for others. Doing so reflects God's character. Doing so is what we are instructed to do. In Galatians 6:2, we are instructed to bear one another's burdens. In Luke 4:18 and 19, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because He has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Through this type of ministry, we may come in contact with those whom we would not otherwise have a chance to impact. We can be a part of pointing others toward true or ultimate answers in the midst of their struggles. Those who do counseling and are involved in ministry will deal with crises. These may be smaller in scope, perhaps only involving an individual. On other occasions, they may be much larger, impacting a family. There will be some instances when crisis can involve an entire church, a segment of a community, or the whole community. Knowledge of what to do when confronted with a crisis is essential to being effective in ministry. Commonly, counselors or ministers will do the best they can in crisis circumstances. In some instances, this can be helpful and beneficial to those undergoing a crisis. In other instances, however, lack of knowledge will result in the counselor or minister actually doing harm in a situation, adding to an already burdened individual or family. Crisis, trauma, loss, and grief. Sometimes you will find these terms used interchangeably, as if they are synonyms of each other. While these terms are interrelated, I believe each of these terms represents different, distinct processes, each important to understand. Making sense out of these terms and understanding the processes related help the caregiver be prepared to offer the most effective interventions. The first term that we will consider is crisis. We will look at the definitions of crisis, what kinds of crises show up in the Bible, and what factors determine the impact of a crisis event. Generally, when you hear the word crisis, it denotes something bad. If you ask others whether a crisis is a good thing or a bad thing, most individuals will see it as a negative. The term crisis is used broadly in everyday language, and it can mean an extreme event like raging fires in the western U.S., or it could mean that a person's favorite Starbucks is closed for repair as they are running late to their morning meeting. For those who attempt to define crisis, there tend to be a couple of types of definition. The first type is crisis as a problematic state. Researchers such as Everly and Mitchell and H. Norm Wright see crisis as this type of problematic state. The second definition is crisis as a turning point. Oden, James, and Gilliland are writers who go by this type of definition. In this definition, a crisis can turn either in a good direction or a bad direction. My preferred definition comes from a writer named Christy Cannell, who says that a crisis has three components. First, there is some precipitating event, and the event can be a real event or something that is just perceived. Second, the person's perception of the event causes distress. Cannell believes that the person's perception is especially important to understanding the crisis and in what intervention a helper might use. Number three, the person then experiences a challenge to or a failure in their usual coping mechanisms. The specific word crisis doesn't appear in the Bible, but there are many terms that parallel or convey the idea of crisis. Some of these terms include trial, tribulation, test, persecution, affliction, suffering, adversity, pain, and perhaps others that come to mind. The Bible identifies many individuals in crisis, including Adam and Eve, Jacob, Moses and his family, David, Esther, Daniel, Jeremiah, Mary and Joseph, the disciples, and Paul. In the Old Testament, the nation of Israel seems to commonly be in crisis. In the New Testament, we see many individuals and families seeking Jesus for healing from various crises that these families are facing. One might even ask the question of whether or not Jesus experiences a type of crisis as he prays in the garden before his crucifixion. Scripture presents a picture of crises being a part of life. Sometimes it is the result of our own sin, sometimes it is the result of other people's sin, and on some occasions it is the result of following God. It is possible to follow God with all of your heart and to still end up in crisis. The Bible is very clear that God knows of the crises we experience. God is with us during these times, and God is able to help us overcome and grow from many of the crises we face. Trusting in God's goodness and in His character is key to navigating through crises. So, what factors determine the impact of a crisis? Ultimately, in order to help a person in crisis, it is important to understand the nature of the crisis that is taking place. To determine the impact of crisis, whether it will be positive or negative, I think that the formula looks something like this. The nature of the crisis event plus the person in the crisis both work together to equal whether or not there is a positive or negative impact from the crisis. So let's look at each of those in a little bit more detail. The nature of the crisis event is the first factor contributing to the impact of crisis. A crisis event, for instance, can be gradual or sudden. A gradual crisis might be a slowly developing health concern that a person is experiencing. A sudden crisis would be a stroke which occurs with little or no warning. A crisis can range in severity from minor to severe. A flat tire, on the whole, is really a relatively minor crisis. A car wreck with injuries is a more severe crisis. A crisis can be brief or of extended duration. A beloved pet that may be missing for half an hour but found in the next neighborhood would be an example of a very brief crisis. Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey were extended crises lasting over several days and even weeks for some who experienced it. Some crises may even go to the point of lasting over years. Crises are capable of producing losses. Some crises don't result in loss. The crisis happens, then it resolves, and nothing is truly lost. Other crises, however, produce multiple extensive losses. Crises that are severe, are extended in duration, and produce multiple losses tend to be the most impactful. The second factor in the impact of crisis is the person who's in the crisis. Each person enters a crisis event with a set of coping skills. Some individuals have weak, ineffective, or unhelpful coping skills. Other individuals draw on their personal strengths, have effective means of coping, and are quite resilient. Some individuals even thrive in crises. ER physicians, fighter pilots, athletes would be examples of some individuals who thrive on crises. Individuals vary greatly in how they perceive potential crisis events. One person can view a crisis event as devastating and unwinnable. Another person can actually view the same crisis as a challenge. Some crises are not real, but a person may perceive them to be real. Understanding a person's perspective is very important to helping the person cope with and go through the crisis. Individuals have differing levels of support during and following crises. Some individuals have little to no friend, family, coworker, neighbor, or church family support. Other individuals have extensive, healthy support networks. Individuals have varying numbers of associated stressors. Some people enter a crisis situation with few other stressors taking place in their life. Other individuals enter a crisis already challenged and even depleted by other life stressors. Individuals have the best chance of navigating crises if they have good coping skills, strong family and friend support, and if they aren't depleted from other excessive types of stressors. If an individual perceives crises in an accurate manner and views the situation as a challenge, they are more likely to have a good outcome with the crisis. Thus, the nature of the crisis situation and the makeup of the person facing the crisis intermix to play a strong role in whether or not the person will have a positive or negative outcome from the crisis. Crises are not unusual. In fact, crises seem to be a part of being human. Some individuals seem more adept at facing and working through crises. Some individuals seem overwhelmed, even by what appears to be a rather minor type of crisis. When caregivers work with individuals in crisis, it is important to understand the nature of the crisis and to assess the strengths and vulnerabilities of the person who has encountered the crisis.